They fired me because I refused to work weekends. 5 weeks later, 37 remaining employees submitted their resignations on the same day. And on an ordinary Monday morning, I returned to the office, not to apologize, but to take it all back. The smell of burning plastic was the first sign something was wrong. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, running simulations and tweaking algorithms when my ancient microwave decided to stage a rebellion. The blue-white flash behind the yellowed door sent me scrambling for the power cord. 9 years ago, in that cramped New Haven apartment, with water stains blooming across the ceiling and radiators that clanked like they were speaking in Morse code, I created something that would eventually change everything. I'm Harper Sullivan. That night, as my dinner smoldered inside a now-defunct appliance, I wasn't thinking about corporate empires or revenge. I was just a 34-year-old AI engineer with bloodshot eyes and a half-finished doctoral thesis, trying to solve a problem no one else seemed interested in. Could machines understand how humans feel? Not in the simplified, sentiment analysis way that was popular then, scanning text for positive or negative words. I wanted something deeper, something that could detect the dissonance between what people say and what they mean. The hesitations, the forced enthusiasm, the quiet desperation. I called it Clarity Gauge. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd created an emotional analysis tool while subsisting on ramen and coding for days without human contact. My advisor had called it interesting but impractical. 3 venture capital firms had politely declined meetings. But I kept working because I knew I was onto something real. The night of the microwave incident, I was finalizing a prototype that could analyze video interviews and detect micro-expressions, those fleeting facial movements that betray our true feelings. 2 days later, I received an email from someone claiming to be the PR director for Nexus Pharmaceuticals, a Fortune 100 company on the verge of launching a breakthrough medication. "We need your technology." The message read, "Name your price." I almost deleted it as spam, but curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to a meeting. That meeting changed everything. Nexus was about to launch a drug they'd spent billions developing. Their clinical trials showed strong efficacy, but they were concerned about a pattern they were seeing in patient interviews, something their traditional focus groups weren't capturing. They'd heard about my research through an academic connection and wanted to try an unconventional approach. I installed a primitive version of Clarity Gauge to analyze their trial participant interviews. Within 48 hours, I delivered news they didn't want to hear. Patients were experiencing side effects they were too embarrassed to report directly. The data was unmistakable. Nexus pulled the launch, investigated further, and reformulated. 6 months later, they released a safer product. What could have been a devastating scandal became a minor delay. The CEO sent me a handwritten note. "You saved our company. How can we repay you?" I asked for funding to properly develop Clarity Gauge. They introduced me to their investors. Within a year, I had a real office, a small team, and clients across 3 industries. We built a platform that could analyze emotional responses in real time across text, audio, and video. Companies used it to test products, politicians to prepare for debates, educators to improve engagement. By year 3, we were profitable and growing. Our core team, Dion handling data architecture, Max designing the interface, Leo refining the algorithms, and me steering the vision, worked together seamlessly. We attracted talent because we offered something rare: meaningful work with reasonable hours. I insisted no one work weekends unless absolutely necessary. "Fresh minds make better decisions" became our unofficial motto. Year 5 brought the kind of attention I wasn't prepared for. Tech publications wrote features. Competitors emerged. Acquisition offers started arriving. Most were straightforward. Big check, integration into their ecosystem. Team dispersed within 6 months. I declined them all. Then Stratus Nova came calling. They weren't the biggest or most prestigious company, but their approach was different. "We don't want to absorb you," their CEO said during our first dinner. "We want to amplify you." The terms sounded reasonable. Clarity Gauge would become a division of Stratus Nova while maintaining operational independence. I would join their executive team as Chief Strategy Officer. My team would stay intact. The technology would receive the resources needed to scale globally. I was skeptical but intrigued. My lawyer, Marla Hines, was less enthusiastic. "They're buying your brain and your baby," she said over coffee. "Make sure you have an escape hatch." Marla insisted on adding what would later become known as Section 9B, a clause stating that if I were ever terminated without documented cause, I would retain the right to repurchase all intellectual properties, the client relationships, and infrastructure associated with Clarity Gauge for the symbolic sum of $1. When the Stratus Nova legal team questioned it, Marla shrugged. "It's just insurance. Harper isn't planning to get fired, and you're not planning to fire her without cause, so this will never be relevant." They agreed, and the contracts were signed. Champagne was poured. Press releases celebrated the strategic partnership. For the first 6 months, everything worked exactly as promised. Then the CEO who'd courted me left for a bigger opportunity. The board appointed Caleb Roston as his replacement, a man with slicked back hair, an MBA from a prestigious school, and absolutely no understanding of what made our technology special. But he had a vision for aggressive growth and a vocabulary full of terms like vibes, momentum loops, and narrative design. During his first all-hands meeting, he used the phrase synergistic alignment 7 times. I counted. Caleb brought in his own team, including Isabella Crane as Chief Marketing Officer. Isabella hosted alignment yoga sessions in the office and insisted our data dashboards should embrace users like a meditation blanket. She wanted to rename our key metrics to sound more nourishing. Accuracy rates became truth resonance. User engagement became soul connection. I tried to be diplomatic. "Our clients value precision," I explained during a product strategy meeting. "They come to us because the data is reliable and unambiguous." Isabella smiled the way adults smile at precocious children. "That's legacy thinking, Harper. We're evolving the brand narrative." The strategy whiteboard where I'd sketched the original Clarity Gauge framework was removed during an office redesign. My weekly product development meetings were rescheduled to times when I had conflicts, then eventually canceled due to low attendance. Features I designed were modified without consultation. My longtime team members started leaving. Dion accepted an offer from a startup in Austin. Max moved to Amsterdam for a change of pace. Leo took a sabbatical that quietly became permanent. They were replaced by graduates from Caleb's alma mater who called me ma'am in meetings and explained basic machine learning concepts to me as if I were a child. One of them suggested we should simplify the algorithm to make it more scalable, which was code for make it less accurate but easier to sell. I was being frozen out of my own creation. One evening, I was working late. A rarity in the new culture where everyone seemed to leave precisely at 5 p.m., except on mandated inspiration nights. Toby, a former intern who'd grown into our mobile team lead, stopped by my office. "They have a list," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "You're at the top." I nodded, unsurprised. "Thanks for the warning." After he left, I opened my fireproof safe and pulled out the original acquisition contract. I found Section 9B, made a copy, and slipped it into my bag. Then I wrote a check for $1, payable to Stratus Nova, and placed it in an envelope. I didn't mail it, just kept it ready. The following Thursday, I received a calendar invitation for a 4:30 p.m. meeting with HR. No agenda, no explanation. I knew what was coming. I arrived 5 minutes early, wearing my best suit and carrying nothing but my phone and that envelope. Caleb and Isabella were already there, along with a woman from HR whose name I couldn't remember, and a man I'd never seen before, presumably from legal. "Harper," Caleb began, his voice practiced and somber. "First, I want to acknowledge your contributions to the company. Your vision laid the groundwork for what we're building." The past tense wasn't subtle. "However," he continued, "as we align around our new strategic direction, we've determined that your role needs to evolve. We're restructuring the executive team to better position ourselves for the future we envision. Isabella nodded earnestly. We truly value the legacy you've created. Legacy, as if I were already dead. The HR woman slid a folder across the table. This separation package is quite generous. 6 months' salary, accelerated vesting of your options, and extended health benefits. I didn't open the folder. What's the official reason for my termination? The lawyer cleared his throat. This is a structural reorganization, not a termination for cause. Perfect. I stood up. I understand. I'll clear out my office now. They seemed surprised by my lack of resistance. Caleb recovered quickly. We've arranged for facilities to help you with your personal items, he said, gesturing to the door where a security guard waited, reeking of snack chips and failure. I was escorted to my office, where 3 cardboard boxes had already been placed on my desk. The guard watched as I collected my plants, photos, and the small ceramic sculpture a client had given me after we'd helped save their business from a disastrous rebranding. I didn't take any papers, files, or company property. I didn't need to. The guard followed me to the elevator, then through the lobby, and watched as I loaded the boxes into my car. I thanked him, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. At home, I made a cup of tea, then addressed the envelope containing my $1 check. I added a single line on company letterhead. I hereby exercise my rights under Section 9B. I sent it via FedEx Priority overnight. Then I waited. The response came 3 days later, not from Stratus Nova, but from Marla, who'd received a panicked call from their legal department. They're freaking out, she reported with undisguised glee. Apparently, no one currently employed there had actually read Section 9B in detail. The corporate attorney who approved it left 2 years ago. What are they saying? I asked. They're claiming the clause isn't enforceable. But here's the beautiful part. The acquisition was structured as a holding company arrangement, not a true merger. Clarity Gauge technically still exists as a legal entity, and you are its sole controlling shareholder. So when they fired me, they triggered your right to reclaim everything, the technology, the client contracts, even the infrastructure they've built around it, all for $1. Marla paused. Harper, you didn't just get your company back. You got everything they built on top of it. I let that sink in. Will it hold up? Their lawyers are scrambling. But yes, the language is clear. The contract was properly executed, and they terminated you without cause. They've already cashed your check, which constitutes acceptance of the terms. She chuckled. You know what their legal team is saying? We never thought she'd actually do it. The following Monday, Stratus Nova's stock dropped 12% when rumors of intellectual property issues began circulating. By Wednesday, it was down 28% as more details emerged. Clients started calling their account managers, asking if I was coming back. 3 investors put planned funding rounds on hold. A major customer tweeted, "We signed on because of Harper Sullivan's vision, not a cartoon seal mascot." The post received 60,000 engagements within hours. Tech publications that had once featured me as a rising star now wrote about the strategic blunder at Stratus Nova. One headline read, $1 buyback clause may cost Stratus Nova $200 million. I leased office space 2 buildings down from Stratus Nova's headquarters. It was smaller, but it had better natural light and no inspirational quotes painted on the walls. Within days, I started receiving emails from former team members. Toby was first, ready to rebuild whenever you are. Then Beth from accounting. They have no idea how the billing system actually works. Even Dion wrote from Austin. My new contract has a 30-day notice period, just saying. I didn't poach employees. I didn't have to. They came on their own, frustrated by the dismantling of what we'd built. Some had already left. Others submitted their resignations after hearing I was starting fresh. On a single Monday, 37 Stratus Nova employees gave notice. The company cafeteria ran out of cake. We incorporated as Clarity Gauge Labs. No cartoon mascots, no soul connection metrics. just solid technology that delivered on its promises. We reached out to our original clients first, many of whom switched back immediately. Some had never signed with Stratos Nova after the acquisition, waiting to see what would happen. 3 months after my termination, I received an unexpected invitation to deliver the keynote address at Rebuild 2025, a major industry conference. The organizer's email simply said, "People want to hear your story." I accepted, though public speaking had never been my strength. I prepared carefully, focusing not on revenge, but on resilience, on staying true to your vision even when others try to reshape it. On the day of the conference, I stood before a packed room. I placed my original $1 check, now framed, on the podium. "This," I said, "is the most expensive dollar Stratos Nova ever earned." The audience laughed, but fell silent as I continued. They fired me because I refused to work weekends. I believed then, as I do now, that creativity and innovation don't flourish under exhaustion, that respecting boundaries makes us better, not worse. I explained how Clarity Gauge was built on understanding human emotion, yet the company that acquired it failed to understand the humans who created it. They thought they were buying technology, I said, but they were really buying people, our knowledge, our passion, our commitment, and when they discarded the people, they lost everything else too. As I concluded my speech, my phone vibrated. A message from Marla. "Stratos Nova board just announced resignation of CEO and CMO. You outlasted them all." I didn't share this with the audience. Instead, I invited them to visit our new offices for a demonstration of our latest platform, built by a team that never worked weekends unless they wanted to. The rebuilding wasn't easy. We had to recreate systems, reconnect with clients, and reestablish our reputation. But we were leaner and more focused than before. And we had something Stratos Nova never understood: a culture built on mutual respect. 6 months after the keynote, we were approached by 3 different companies interested in partnerships, not acquisitions. One of them, Meridian Technologies, proposed a collaboration model where we would maintain complete autonomy while gaining access to their global distribution network. Their CEO, Nadine Wilson, met with me personally to discuss terms. "We've learned from Stratos Nova's mistake," she said. "We don't want to own you. We want to work with you." I brought Marla to the second meeting. This time, we didn't need Section 9B. Instead, we created a framework for true collaboration with clear boundaries and mutual benefits. As we left that meeting, Marla smiled. "You know what makes this different? They respect you, not just your technology, but you." That respect extended to our team and our methods. No one questioned our policy about weekends. In fact, several partners adopted similar approaches after seeing our productivity metrics. A year after my termination from Stratos Nova, Clarity Gauge Labs was valued at 3 times what Stratos had paid for the original company. We'd expanded into new markets, refined our technology, and built a reputation for both innovation and integrity. Caleb and Isabella both landed at other companies, though neither in CEO positions. Occasionally, I'd see their names mentioned in industry news, usually in articles about leadership transitions or strategic pivots. The former Stratos Nova, now operating under a new name after a hasty rebranding, continued to struggle. Their stock eventually recovered some value, but they never regained their former position. The $1 buyback became a cautionary tale taught in business schools and referenced in contracts throughout the industry. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office at a reasonable hour, I ran into Toby in the elevator. "Remember when you told me they had a list?" I asked. He nodded. "I was scared I'd be next." "Why did you warn me?" He considered the question carefully. "Because you built something that mattered, and they were turning it into something that didn't." That simple statement captured everything. Clarity Gauge wasn't just about technology, it was about truth, about seeing people clearly and respecting what we saw. The company reflected those values because the people within it held those values. As our elevator reached the ground floor, Toby added, "Also, you never made us work weekends." I laughed. Some battles are worth fighting. We stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine. Tomorrow would be another day of building something meaningful. And the weekend would be for rest, for life outside work, for recharging the creativity that made our work possible. That was the true victory, not just reclaiming what was mine, but preserving what made it valuable in the first place. They fired me because I refused to work weekends. In doing so, they lost their company to a $1 clause. But the real cost of their mistake wasn't financial. It was failing to understand that respecting people's boundaries doesn't diminish what they create. It makes it possible. I walked home through the city streets, thinking about the long journey from that cramped New Haven apartment with the smoking microwave to where I stood now. The technology had evolved dramatically, but the core insight remained the same. Understanding human emotion is the key to building something that lasts. And sometimes, the most important emotion to understand is your own. The first winter after reclaiming Clarity Gauge was brutal. Not just the weather, though New England certainly delivered its usual quota of snow and bitter winds, but the sheer workload of rebuilding from scratch. We had the intellectual property and the core team, but infrastructure takes time to reconstruct. Dion returned from Austin, bringing with her two talented engineers who had been looking for work with meaning. Leo emerged from his sabbatical with new insights on neural network architectures. Max couldn't leave Amsterdam immediately, but consulted remotely, redesigning our interfaces for better intuitive understanding. We worked long hours, voluntarily, to meet the aggressive timeline we'd set for ourselves. But weekends remained sacred. I made sure of it. If someone has a brilliant idea on Saturday, I told the team during our first all-hands meeting, write it down and bring it Monday. It'll still be brilliant, and you'll be rested enough to implement it properly. Our new office became a second home during those months. We installed comfortable furniture, a proper kitchen, and a small library stocked with technical journals and surprisingly relevant fiction. The whiteboard where I'd sketched the original Clarity Gauge concept was recreated, though the new version was larger and equipped with digital capture technology. Clients who'd switched to us from Stratus Nova were patient with our growing pains, impressed by our commitment to rebuilding, right rather than just rebuilding fast. Those who'd stayed with Stratos began reaching out as their contracts came up for renewal. One such client was Vertex Global, a consumer products giant that had been one of our earliest adopters. Their chief marketing officer, Richard Tanner, requested a meeting 3 months after our restart. "I'll be honest," he said as we sat in our still Spartan conference room. "We're still under contract with Stratus Nova for another 9 months, but their platform has degraded significantly since you left. Features don't work consistently, and their support team can't explain why." "What specifically are you struggling with?" I asked. He pulled out his tablet and showed me their dashboard. The clean, information-dense interface we'd designed had been replaced with something that looked like a children's game, complete with animated characters that celebrated when metrics improved. "These seal mascots dance when our numbers go up," Richard said, visibly irritated. "But we can't access the raw data anymore to verify if the numbers are actually correct." I nodded, unsurprised. "They're hiding complexity rather than managing it." "Exactly." Their new account manager told us the detailed analytics were causing negative energy, and suggested we focus on directional insights instead. He put the tablet away. "We need what we had before. Real analysis, not cartoon seals." We negotiated a transition plan that would begin the moment their Stratos contract ended. Richard left with a prototype of our rebuilt platform, which maintained the clarity of our original design while incorporating new analytical capabilities. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "You know, when Stratus Nova announced they'd acquired Clarity Gauge, our procurement team was thrilled. They thought we'd get the benefit of your technology with the security of a larger company." He shook his head. "Turns out we got neither." That pattern repeated itself across multiple industries. Companies that had been attracted to the Stratus Nova brand discovered that the substance they needed came from the people, not the corporate structure. By month 4, we'd rebuilt our core infrastructure and begun innovating again. The team had grown to 28 people, most of them former Clarity Gauge employees who'd left Stratus Nova either before or after my departure. We instituted a new policy. Every employee received equity in the company, not token amounts, but meaningful stakes that would grow in value as we succeeded. I wanted everyone to feel ownership, not just of their specific tasks, but of our collective mission. We also formalized the weekend policy. The official employee handbook stated simply, "Weekends are for life outside work. Exceptions may occur for genuine emergencies, which will be compensated with equivalent time off plus a 50% premium." In practice, emergencies were rare. We built redundancies into our systems and contingency plans for most scenarios. When a server cluster failed on Easter Sunday, the on-call engineer handled it remotely in 30 minutes, then took Tuesday off with pay. The contrast with Stratus Nova became increasingly apparent as former employees shared stories. Under Caleb and Isabella's leadership, the company had instituted mandatory inspiration sessions on alternating Saturdays, unpaid but strongly encouraged. Projects were routinely scheduled with impossible deadlines, requiring nights and weekend work to complete. Yet productivity had plummeted. Features took longer to implement, contained more bugs, and often missed the mark with users. The vibrant culture that had made Clarity Gauge special had been replaced with rigid hierarchies and performative enthusiasm. 6 months after our restart, we received an unexpected visitor. Jessica Wright, who'd been appointed Chief Technology Officer at Stratus Nova shortly after my departure, arrived without an appointment one Tuesday afternoon. "I need 10 minutes, she told our receptionist. "It's important." I agreed to see her, curious about what could be so urgent. Jessica had been a contemporary at MIT, though we'd never worked directly together. Her reputation was solid, a capable engineer who'd risen through management ranks at several major tech companies. "I'll get straight to the point," she said after declining coffee. "Stratus Nova is imploding. The platform is unstable, clients are leaving, and the board is panicking." I waited, saying nothing. "They want to sue you," she continued. "They're claiming you sabotaged the systems before leaving, that you violated non-compete clauses, that you stole trade secrets." "None of that is true," I replied calmly. "The systems were functioning perfectly when I left. I created a new company according to the terms of my contract. And the only secrets I took were the ones I brought in the first place." She nodded. "I know. I've told them as much. The problems aren't sabotage, they're incompetence. They've been modifying core systems without understanding how they work. It's like watching someone rewire a house while refusing to believe in electricity." "Why are you telling me this?" Jessica leaned forward. "Because I'm leaving too. I've given my notice. And I wanted to warn you about what's coming." "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. But Marla prepared for this possibility. "Our legal position is solid." "It's not just legal action," Jessica said. "They're planning a smear campaign, articles about how you're difficult to work with, blind quotes about your unreasonable demands. They've already reached out to several tech publications." This was concerning but not entirely surprising. Why would publications run that kind of hit piece? Because Stratus Nova still has a substantial advertising budget, and journalism isn't what it used to be. She stood to leave. "I thought you should know. For what it's worth, I think what they did to you was shameful. And what you did in response was inspiring." After she left, I called Marla to brief her on the potential PR attack. She was unconcerned. "Let them try," she said. "We have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth, and about 30 former employees willing to tell it." The smear campaign materialized 2 weeks later, beginning with a profile in Tech Future titled "The High Cost of Genius: Working with Harper Sullivan." The article quoted anonymous sources describing me as brilliant but impossible, unwilling to compromise, and resistant to necessary changes. The piece might have gained traction, except for what happened next. Within hours of publication, the comments section filled with responses from named former employees, contradicting the anonymous claims with specific examples of my leadership and collaboration. Toby wrote about how I'd supported his transition from intern to team lead, providing mentorship and opportunities for growth. Beth detailed the collaborative process we'd used to design our financial systems. Dion described how I'd encouraged her to challenge my assumptions and integrate her own vision into our data architecture. The following day, the same publication ran a new article. Former employees rally behind ousted founder. The anonymous sources disappeared, and the narrative shifted dramatically. Other planned hit pieces were quietly canceled as publications realized the story wasn't what Stratos Nova claimed. Instead, a counter-narrative emerged about corporate culture clashes and the value of founder-led innovation. Meanwhile, our business continued to grow. We secured a significant investment from a venture capital firm that specialized in second acts, companies that had overcome major setbacks to emerge stronger. The funding allowed us to accelerate our development roadmap and expand our client base. Stratos Nova did eventually file a lawsuit, claiming violations of intellectual property rights and contractual obligations. The case never reached trial. After 6 months of preliminary motions and discovery, during which their legal position steadily weakened, they offered a settlement. The terms were simple: mutual non-disparagement, a clean break on all contractual obligations, and a financial payment to us, not from us, for transitional considerations. The amount wasn't life-changing, but it covered our legal expenses with enough left over for a company-wide bonus. The day the settlement was finalized, we closed the office early and gathered at a nearby restaurant for dinner. It wasn't a celebration of victory over Stratos Nova. We'd moved beyond that narrative. It was an acknowledgement of what we'd built together, and a moment to look forward rather than back. As the meal concluded, I stood to offer a toast. To boundaries, I said, raising my glass. The ones we defend and the ones we create. May we always know the difference. The team cheered, and conversations flowed freely as the evening progressed. I moved from table to table, connecting with both longtime colleagues and newer additions to our team. Everyone had stories to share, challenges overcome, insights gained, moments of unexpected breakthrough. Around 9, I stepped outside for some air and found Dion already there, watching the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts," I offered. She smiled. "I was just thinking about how differently things could have gone. If you'd compromised a little more, played their game, I'd still be at Stratos Nova, miserable but employed. Maybe, or maybe you'd have transformed them instead of them transforming you." She shrugged. "We'll never know." I couldn't have done it. I admitted, not because I'm stubborn, though I am, but because it would have meant betraying what makes the technology valuable. We built Clarity Gauge to reveal authentic human responses. How could I run that company without authenticity? Dion nodded. That's why we all came back. Not just because Stratos Nova became unbearable, but because what we were building here mattered. It still does. Inside, the party continued. Through the window, I could see Toby demonstrating something on his phone to a group of enraptured colleagues. Leo was deep in conversation with our newest data scientist, sketching something on a napkin. Max, visiting from Amsterdam, was laughing at something Beth had said. This was the real victory, not reclaiming a company, but rebuilding a community, one with clear values and shared purpose. The following Monday brought news that Caleb Roston had resigned as CEO of Stratos Nova to pursue other opportunities. Isabella had departed weeks earlier, joining a wellness app startup as Chief Brand Officer. The company announced a strategic realignment and a return to its core competencies. In practical terms, this meant abandoning most of what had been Clarity Gauge and focusing on their original business lines. The cartoon seal mascot disappeared from their website, replaced with generic stock photos of diverse professionals looking at tablets. We paid little attention to these changes, focused instead on our own evolution. The technology that had begun in my New Haven apartment had grown far beyond its original conception. What started as a tool to detect micro-expressions in video interviews now analyzed patterns across dozens of data types, identifying emotional responses that subjects themselves might not consciously recognize. Companies used our platform to test product concepts, refine customer experiences, and understand user frustrations before they led to abandonment. Healthcare providers applied the technology to improve patient communications and identify early signs of conditions ranging from depression to cognitive decline. Educational institutions incorporated it into learning systems that adapted to student engagement levels in real time. The applications were diverse, but the underlying principle remained consistent. See people clearly, respect what you see, and respond appropriately. A year and a half after reclaiming Clarity Gauge, we faced a familiar question. Should we seek another partnership or acquisition to accelerate growth? Several offers had arrived, each more respectful and carefully structured than what Stratos Nova had proposed. I brought the question to our leadership team, now composed of both original founders and newer executives who joined during our rebirth. We dedicated a full day to discussing options, examining potential partners, and considering the impact on our culture and mission. The consensus wasn't what I expected. Rather than choosing a single partner, the team proposed a consortium model where we would collaborate with multiple organizations while maintaining our independence. This would give us access to resources and distribution channels without surrendering control. It's like dating instead of getting married, Toby explained. We can build relationships without merging identities. We implemented this approach over the following year, establishing strategic partnerships with companies across different sectors. Each relationship was structured around specific projects with clear boundaries and shared incentives. No single partner could dictate our direction, but collectively, they provided the reach we needed to grow. The model proved remarkably successful. By our second anniversary, Clarity Gauge Labs had quadrupled its client base and expanded into international markets. Our team grew to 70 people, carefully selected for both technical skill and cultural fit. We maintained our policy about weekends, even as we scaled. New employees sometimes arrived skeptical, having been conditioned by previous employers to equate dedication with constant availability. They quickly discovered that our boundaries actually enhanced productivity rather than limiting it. I get more done in 40 focused hours than I did in 60 distracted ones at my last job, a new engineer told me during her 3-month review, and I'm not constantly exhausted and resentful. That pattern repeated itself across departments and seniority levels. By protecting time for rest and personal life, we enabled deeper engagement during work hours. Creativity flourished, problem-solving improved, and employee retention reached industry-leading levels. The contrast with Stratos Nova's approach became a case study taught at business schools. A professor from Harvard Business School contacted me about featuring our story in a course on organizational culture and innovation. I agreed, with the condition that the case study include perspectives from multiple team members, not just mine. The resulting paper, Boundaries and Brilliance, the Clarity Gauge Resurgence, documented how our policies on work-life balance contributed to both employee satisfaction and business success. It included data on productivity metrics, innovation outputs, and financial performance, all correlating positively with our approach to protecting weekends and personal time. When the paper was published, it generated significant discussion within the tech industry. Some executives dismissed it as unique to our situation or not scalable across different business models. Others recognized the potential for broader application. Among the latter was Nadine Wilson, CEO of Meridian Technologies, one of our consortium partners. She implemented a modified version of our weekend policy across her organization. Despite resistance from traditional managers who equated hours with output, 6 months later, she shared the results. Overall productivity had increased by 14%, while voluntary turnover had decreased by 22%. The changes were most pronounced in creative and technical roles, where the quality of work showed measurable improvement. The problem with the old approach, Nadine told me over dinner, is that it confuses activity with accomplishment. Tired people might look busy, but they rarely produce their best work. This philosophy, valuing quality over quantity, effectiveness over appearance, became central to our identity as we continued to grow. We weren't just a technology company. We were a demonstration that success didn't require sacrifice of personal well-being. 3 years after my termination from Stratus Nova, I received an unexpected email. The message came from Thomas Brandt, the original CEO who had negotiated our acquisition before departing for bigger opportunities. "I owe you an apology," he wrote. "I sold you a vision I couldn't guarantee, then left before ensuring it was delivered. What happened afterward was partly my responsibility, and I've carried that knowledge uncomfortably since watching how things unfolded." The message continued, describing how he'd followed our story from afar, impressed by our resilience and growth. "You've built something remarkable, twice," he concluded. "I wonder if you'd be willing to meet, not for business, just for closure." I considered ignoring the message. Thomas wasn't directly responsible for my termination, but his departure had set those events in motion. Still, there was something genuine in his words that resonated with me. We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our offices. He arrived early, already seated with 2 cups of coffee when I walked in. "Harper," he said, standing to greet me. "Thank you for coming." Up close, Thomas looked different than I remembered. The polished corporate exterior remained, but there was a weariness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You mentioned closure," I said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "What did you mean by that?" He took a moment before answering. "When I left Stratus Nova, I believed I was moving towards something better. A larger company, more resources, bigger impact." He stirred his coffee unnecessarily. "It turned out to be a lateral move at best. Different business cards, same limitations." "And our company?" I prompted. "I recommended Caleb as my replacement," he admitted. "We'd worked together previously, and he had impressive credentials. What I failed to consider was that he had no understanding of what made Clarity Gauge special." Thomas looked up. "That's on me." I nodded, appreciating his directness. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I'm starting something new," he replied. "And I want to do it right this time. Not just the technology or the business model, but the culture, the values." He hesitated. "I've been studying how you rebuilt Clarity Gauge Labs, the boundaries you established, the respect you maintained for people's time and contributions." "And you want my blessing?" I asked, slightly amused. "No," he said seriously. "I want your insight, not as a consultant or advisor, just as someone who's created something worth protecting." We talked for nearly 2 hours. I shared the principles that guided our rebuild, the lessons learned from both failure and success. Thomas listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and taking occasional notes. As we prepared to leave, he made one final comment. "You know, when Stratus Nova's stock collapsed after your departure, there was a lot of blame being thrown around. Your name came up constantly, usually with colorful adjectives attached." "I can imagine," I replied dryly. But privately, in boardrooms and executive suites across the industry, there was something else happening. He smiled slightly. "People were impressed, not just by the legal maneuver, but by what you did afterward. You didn't just take back your company, you proved why it was yours to begin with." Thomas's new venture launched 6 months later. Its founding principles, publicly shared on their website, included a clear policy about respecting personal time and maintaining work-life boundaries. One section stated explicitly, "We don't work weekends unless there's a genuine emergency, because we believe fresh minds create better solutions." I sent him a brief message. "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery." He replied, "Not imitation, evolution." The ripple effects of our story continued to spread throughout the industry. Other companies began reconsidering their approach to work schedules, particularly for creative and technical roles. Articles appeared with titles like "The Productivity Paradox: Why Working Less Might Accomplish More," and "Boundaries as Business Strategy." Not everyone was convinced. Traditional voices argued that true innovation requires sacrifice and that disruption doesn't happen on a 9-to-5 schedule. But the data increasingly supported our approach. Studies showed that extended work hours produce diminishing returns. with actual productivity declining sharply after certain thresholds. 4 years after reclaiming Clarity Gauge, we faced a decision point. We'd grown to over 100 employees, expanded into multiple international markets, and developed new applications for our technology. The consortium model had served us well, but it was becoming complex to manage as we scaled. Some of our partners proposed a more formal structure, a holding company that would unite our various collaborations under a single entity while preserving the independence of each component. The arrangement would provide capital for expansion while distributing risk across multiple participants. I brought the proposal to our leadership team, which now included representatives from every department and level of the organization. We debated the merits over several sessions, examining both opportunities and potential pitfalls. This feels different from what Stratus Nova offered, Dion observed during our final discussion. They wanted to absorb us. This would be more like joining a federation. Leo nodded. The technical autonomy would remain intact. We'd still control our development roadmap. What about the culture? Asked Priya, who'd joined us from a major competitor the previous year. Would we maintain our policies on work-life balance? That's non-negotiable, I said firmly. Any agreement would need to explicitly protect those principles. After thorough consideration, we decided to move forward with the holding company structure, but with careful protections built into the agreements. Marla worked with us to craft terms that would prevent a repeat of the Stratus Nova situation. Think of it as Section 9B on steroids, she said as we reviewed the final documents. This time, everyone knows exactly what they're signing. The transition was announced with appropriate fanfare. Business publications covered the story, focusing on the innovative structure and collaborative approach. Several pieces mentioned our commitment to work-life balance as a key component of our success. One reporter asked if I was concerned about another takeover attempt. We're not being taken over, I clarified. We're helping create something new while preserving what makes us special. I smiled. And yes, that includes our weekends. The holding company, named Convergence Partners, brought together 5 complementary organizations under a shared governance framework. Each maintained operational independence while benefiting from collective resources and market presence. The structure allowed us to undertake larger projects and compete for clients that might previously have been beyond our reach. 6 months into this new arrangement, we secured our largest contract to date, a global implementation for a multinational corporation seeking to transform their customer experience. The project would require coordination across 3 continents and integration with multiple existing systems. In the old days, such a project would have inevitably led to weekend work and late nights. Instead, we approached it differently. We built realistic timelines that accounted for our work policies. We established clear handoffs between teams in different time zones. We created redundancy in critical roles to prevent bottlenecks. The client was initially skeptical. This timeline seems extended, their CTO commented during planning discussions. It's realistic, I countered. We found that aggressive deadlines often lead to hidden costs, quality issues, team burnout, unexpected delays. Our approach delivers consistent, predictable results. Somewhat reluctantly, they agreed to our terms. 6 months later, as the first phase launched successfully and on schedule, their perspective had shifted dramatically. I've never seen a project of this complexity execute so smoothly. The same CTO admitted during our review meeting, the quality of work is exceptional, and your team seems genuinely engaged. They are, I confirmed, because they're rested, focused, and treated with respect. He nodded thoughtfully. We've been implementing a similar approach with our internal team since working with you. The results are promising. This pattern repeated itself across multiple clients and industries. What had once been seen as an eccentric policy was increasingly recognized as a competitive advantage. Our reputation grew not just for technological excellence, but for organizational wisdom. 5 years after the termination that could have ended Clarity Gauge, we'd not only survived, but thrived. The company was valued at nearly $1 billion, employed over 200 people across 4 countries, and maintained its foundational values intact. Stratus Nova. meanwhile, had undergone multiple restructurings, eventually being acquired by a larger competitor and disappearing as a distinct entity. Their name survived only in business school case studies about failed acquisitions and cultural misalignment. Caleb Roston and Isabella Crane had moved on to other ventures with varying degrees of success. Occasionally, I'd spot their names in industry news or conference programs, but our paths never directly crossed again. One chilly autumn evening, I found myself working late, voluntarily, to finalize a presentation for an upcoming technology conference. The office was quiet, most employees having departed hours earlier. I preferred this peaceful time for deep thinking, though I was careful not to make it a regular habit. A soft knock at my door interrupted my concentration. Toby stood there, coat in hand, clearly on his way out. "Catching up on email before the weekend?" he asked. I shook my head. "Just finishing this presentation. I find it easier to organize my thoughts when it's quiet." He nodded, understanding. "I was about to grab dinner. Care to join? We could talk about the conference." "Sure," I said, saving my work and closing my laptop. "Food sounds good." As we walked through the darkened office toward the elevators, Toby paused by the wall where we'd hung framed memorabilia from our journey. Among the items was the original $1 check I'd sent to Stratus Nova, the whiteboard sketch of our first algorithm, and a printout of Section 9B. "Do you ever think about how differently things could have turned out?" he asked. "If they hadn't fired you, or if that clause hadn't been in the contract?" I considered the question carefully. Sometimes, I might still be at Stratus Nova, compromising a little more each day until I didn't recognize my own work. Or I might have left on my own, starting from scratch without the intellectual property. "Either way, you wouldn't have given up," Toby said with certainty. "No," I agreed. "But what we built might not have been the same. The adversity shaped us, forced us to clarify what really mattered." We continued to the elevator, both contemplative. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Toby said as we descended. "That meeting where they fired you. They must have felt so confident, so certain they were making the right decision." I smiled. They never imagined I'd actually use Section 9B. That's the thing about boundaries. People don't believe you'll enforce them until you do. And once you do, then everyone takes you seriously. The doors opened to the lobby, and we stepped out into the evening. Tomorrow would be Friday, the end of another productive week. Then would come the weekend, sacred time for rest and renewal. And on Monday, we'd return, ready to build something meaningful together. They fired me because I refused to work weekends. In doing so, they inadvertently gave me the opportunity to create something better, not just a more successful company, but a more humane way of working. The $1 clause had been my escape hatch. But the real value wasn't in what it let me reclaim. It was in what it allowed me to rebuild. As Toby and I walked toward the restaurant, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Marla's foresight in crafting Section 9B, for the team that believed enough to follow me, for the clients who valued substance over appearance, even for Caleb and Isabella, whose misguided leadership had created the opportunity for something better to emerge. Most of all, I was grateful for the boundary I'd defended, the simple insistence that weekends belonged to life, not work. That small stand had cascaded into something much larger, a company culture built on mutual respect, a business model that valued sustainability over exhaustion, and an industry-wide conversation about what truly drives innovation. They fired me because I refused to work weekends. I took back the weekdays too. But what I really reclaimed was something more fundamental: the right to build success on my own terms, with values intact and boundaries respected. And that was worth far more than $1. The Convergence Partners structure proved remarkably resilient over the next 2 years. Our federation of aligned companies grew to include 7 organizations, each maintaining its distinct identity while benefiting from shared resources and market presence. We weren't the largest player in our space, but we were widely regarded as the most innovative and the most humane. Industry publications regularly featured our approach as a case study in sustainable growth. One headline captured it perfectly: the $1 billion boundary. How Clarity Gage's weekend policy built an empire. The article wasn't entirely accurate. We weren't an empire. And our success came from many factors beyond a single policy. But it highlighted something important. Principles that initially seemed to limit us had actually become our greatest strength. 6 years after reclaiming Clarity Gauge, I received an invitation that took me by surprise. The World Economic Forum wanted me to participate in a panel discussion about the future of work at their annual meeting in Davos. My fellow panelists would include the CEO of a major tech conglomerate, a renowned labor economist, and the labor minister from a Scandinavian country known for its progressive policies. They want me to represent the private sector innovation perspective, I told Marla over lunch. Apparently, our approach to work-life boundaries has caught their attention. She smiled. From $1 clause to Davos, not bad for someone who just wanted her weekends off. I laughed. When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous. Most transformative ideas do, she replied, until they become obvious in retrospect. I accepted the invitation, though public speaking still wasn't my favorite activity. The panel would give us a platform to share our experience with a broader audience, not just tech leaders, but policymakers and academics who influenced work practices globally. Preparing for Davos required extensive research and practice. I wanted to ensure our story was presented accurately, without oversimplification or self-aggrandizement. This wasn't about personal vindication or corporate promotion. It was about contributing to an important conversation about how work could evolve. The forum itself was a whirlwind of high-level networking, intense discussions, and carefully choreographed events. Among the suits and security details, I felt somewhat out of place, still more comfortable with code than with diplomatic niceties. Our panel was scheduled for the second day, in one of the main venues. As I waited backstage, I reviewed my notes one final time, focusing on the key points I wanted to convey. The moderator, a respected journalist, began by framing the discussion around global trends: automation, remote work, changing employee expectations, and the growing recognition of burnout as both a health issue and an economic concern. The tech conglomerate CEO spoke first, outlining his company's flexible work policies while emphasizing the need for commitment during critical periods. The economist followed with data on productivity and well-being across different work models. The labor minister described her country's regulatory approach to working hours and the positive outcomes they'd observed. When my turn came, I set aside my prepared remarks and spoke directly from experience. 6 years ago, I was fired for refusing to work weekends. I began. It wasn't a political stance or a negotiating tactic. It was a simple boundary. My time outside work hours belonged to me, not to my employer. I described how that boundary became the foundation for rebuilding Clarity Gauge, not just as a successful company, but as a demonstration that respecting people's time and energy could be a competitive advantage. We didn't succeed despite our limitations. I explained, we succeeded because of them. By protecting time for rest and personal life, we enabled deeper engagement during work hours. Creativity flourished. Problem-solving improved. Employee retention reached extraordinary levels. The data supported our approach: higher productivity per hour worked, lower error rates, greater innovation outputs, and stronger client relationships. These weren't soft benefits. They translated directly to business results. But the most important outcomes can't be measured in quarterly reports. I concluded, they're visible in the lives of our team members, people who can be fully present with their families and communities, who have time for hobbies and personal growth, who bring their best selves to work because they aren't exhausted by it. The discussion that followed was vigorous, but respectful. The conglomerate CEO questioned whether our approach could scale to organizations of hundreds of thousands. The economist wanted to understand the specific mechanisms through which boundaries improved outcomes. The labor minister was curious about how policy could support similar practices more broadly. Throughout the exchange, I remained focused on concrete examples rather than abstract principles. This wasn't about ideology. It was about what worked for people and for business. After the panel, Several attendees approached me with questions and comments. Some were skeptical but curious. Others shared similar experiences from their own organizations. A few were openly dismissive, suggesting our success was unique to our industry or scale. One interaction stood out. The CEO of a major financial institution pulled me aside as I was leaving the venue. "I found your perspective intriguing," he said. "My company has always operated on the assumption that availability equals commitment, but recently, I've noticed diminishing returns from that approach." "How so?" I asked. "Turnover is increasing, particularly among our most talented people. And the quality of work isn't what it should be, despite the hours invested." He paused. "Would you be willing to share more details about how you implemented these boundaries without sacrificing performance?" We arranged to continue the conversation over dinner. What I'd expected to be a brief exchange became a 3-hour discussion about organizational culture, measurement systems, and the courage required to challenge industry norms. "The hardest part," I told him, "isn't the policy itself. It's believing that it can work when everything in your experience suggests otherwise. You have to be willing to endure skepticism and initial disruption to reach the benefits." He nodded thoughtfully. "Like any significant change?" "Exactly. But unlike many changes, this one starts paying dividends almost immediately. People respond quickly to having their boundaries respected." 6 months after Davos, I received an email from him. His company had implemented a pilot program in 3 divisions, limiting after-hours work and protecting weekends except for genuine emergencies. The preliminary results showed improvements in both productivity metrics and employee satisfaction. "We're expanding the program company-wide next quarter," he wrote. "Thank you for helping us see a different way forward." This pattern repeated itself across various industries as our approach gained wider recognition. What had begun as a personal boundary had evolved into a movement, influencing practices far beyond our company or even our sector. 7 years after my termination from Stratus Nova, I faced a new decision point. Convergence Partners had received an acquisition offer from one of the world's largest technology companies. The terms were generous, the assurances about autonomy were strong, and the potential for global impact was significant. I brought the offer to our board, which now included representatives from each company in our federation as well as independent directors with diverse perspectives. The discussion was thorough and nuanced, examining both opportunities and risks. "The financial terms are exceptional," noted our CFO, "and the access to their resources and distribution channels would accelerate our growth dramatically." "But can we trust their commitments about preserving our culture?" asked Priya, who had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer the previous year. "We've heard similar promises before." All eyes turned to me, remembering the Stratos Nova debacle. "This is different in significant ways," I acknowledged. "The structure protects our independence more effectively, and their track record with previous acquisitions is generally positive." I paused. "But any acquisition involves trade-offs. We need to be clear-eyed about what we might gain and what we might lose." The board deliberated for several weeks, consulting with key stakeholders across the organization. Opinions varied, but a consistent theme emerged. Our culture and values were non-negotiable. Any agreement would need to explicitly protect the principles that defined us, particularly our approach to work-life boundaries. Marla, still our trusted legal advisor, worked with a team of specialists to craft terms that would safeguard these essentials. The resulting agreement was complex but clear, with multiple layers of protection for our core principles. "This makes Section 9B look like a casual note," she observed as we reviewed the final documents. "No one can claim they didn't understand these terms." After careful consideration, we accepted the offer with our conditions intact. The acquisition was announced with appropriate fanfare, described in business publications as a meeting of aligned values rather than a traditional takeover. In my statement to the press, I emphasized continuity. This partnership allows us to expand our impact while maintaining the principles that have guided us from the beginning. Our commitment to respecting boundaries, both technological and human, remains absolute. The transition period was intense but surprisingly smooth. Our new parent company honored its commitments, providing resources without imposing control. Our team expanded, our technology reached new markets, and our approach to work-life balance remained intact. In fact, something unexpected happened. Our practices began influencing the larger organization. Departments that worked closely with us adopted similar policies regarding weekend work and after-hours availability. The results were consistently positive, leading to broader implementation across multiple divisions. 2 years after the acquisition, our parent company announced a company-wide policy limiting after-hours communications and protecting weekend time, except for defined emergencies. The announcement cited demonstrated improvements in productivity, creativity, and retention in divisions that had already implemented such boundaries. The policy wasn't identical to ours, it was adapted to different contexts and roles. But the core principle was the same. Respecting people's time and energy outside work hours enables better performance during work hours. 9 years after being fired for refusing to work weekends, I found myself in a position I could never have anticipated, heading a major division within one of the world's largest technology companies, recognized as a thought leader on organizational culture, and watching the principles I'd defended spread across an industry that had once dismissed them. The journey hadn't been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, compromises, and moments of doubt along the way. But the fundamental insight had proven resilient. Boundaries aren't limitations, they're foundations. They create the conditions for sustainable success, both personal and professional. One afternoon, as I was preparing to leave the office at a reasonable hour, I received a notification about an incoming email. The sender's name caught my attention immediately. Caleb Roston. I hesitated before opening it, curious but wary. We hadn't communicated since that Thursday afternoon meeting where he'd terminated my employment at Stratus Nova. The message was brief but direct. Harper, after all these years, I owe you an acknowledgement. You were right about the weekends, about boundaries, about what makes organizations truly effective. It took me losing 3 more positions to recognize the pattern. I was creating cultures of exhaustion rather than excellence, mistaking activity for achievement. I've spent the past 2 years consulting with companies on sustainable work practices, drawing heavily on the model you pioneered. Your influence extends further than you might realize. No response necessary, just wanted you to know. Caleb. I sat with the message for several minutes, considering whether to reply. There was no request for forgiveness, no attempt to rewrite history, just a simple acknowledgement of a lesson learned. Eventually, I wrote back. Caleb, thank you for this message. The journey matters more than where it began. I wish you success in your new direction. Harper. As I sent the reply, I reflected on the strange path that had brought me here. A smoking microwave in a New Haven apartment. A technology built to understand human emotion. An acquisition gone wrong. A $1 clause that changed everything. And throughout it all, a simple boundary. Weekends were for life outside work. They had fired me for defending that boundary. In response, I'd taken back not just the weekdays, but something far more valuable. The right to define success on human terms. That evening, as I left the office, I passed the wall where we still displayed the framed memorabilia from our journey. The $1 check, the whiteboard sketch, the printout of Section 9B. Beside them now hung a new edition, a photograph from Davos, showing me on stage explaining how respecting boundaries had built something remarkable, not just a successful company, but a more humane way of working. They fired me because I refused to work weekends. 9 years later, that refusal had helped change an industry. I smiled at the thought as I stepped into the elevator. Tomorrow would be Friday, the end of another productive week. Then would come the weekend, still sacred time for rest and renewal. And on Monday, we'd return, ready to continue building something meaningful together. Some boundaries are worth defending, even when they cost you everything, especially when they give you everything back. 10 years after my termination from Stratus Nova, ClarityGauge had evolved far beyond its origins. Now a division within a global technology leader, our platform analyzed emotional responses across dozens of contexts, helping organizations understand and improve human experiences ranging from healthcare interactions to educational engagement. Our team had grown to over 500 people across 12 countries, operating with a federated structure that preserved local autonomy while leveraging collective resources. Throughout this expansion, our core principles remained intact, particularly our approach to work-life boundaries. What had once been seen as an eccentric policy had become a recognized best practice, studied in business schools and implemented by companies across multiple industries. Research consistently confirmed what we'd discovered through experience. Protecting time for rest and personal life enhanced productivity, creativity, and engagement during work hours. The industry landscape had shifted dramatically during this decade. Stratus Nova had disappeared entirely, absorbed by competitors and eventually dissolved. Caleb Roston had reinvented himself as a consultant on sustainable work practices, occasionally citing our example in his presentations. Isabella Crane had founded a wellness app focused on helping people maintain healthy boundaries between work and personal life, an ironic evolution given her former approach. I remained involved with ClarityGauge as Chief Innovation Officer, focusing on future applications of our technology while newer leaders handled day-to-day operations. This arrangement gave me time to mentor emerging talent, contribute to industry discussions, and explore new possibilities. One such possibility arrived unexpectedly in the form of an email from Dr. Marcus Chen, a neuroscientist at Stanford University. He was researching the relationship between rest, creativity, and problem-solving capacity, and had been following our company's story with interest. Your organizational approach provides a fascinating real-world case study of these principles in action. He wrote, "Would you be interested in collaborating on research that could help quantify the cognitive benefits of your work-life boundaries?" The proposal intrigued me. While we had substantial data on business outcomes, productivity metrics, retention rates, client satisfaction, we had less formal evidence regarding the cognitive mechanisms involved. Dr. Chen's research could help explain why our approach worked, not just demonstrate that it did. We arranged a video call to discuss possibilities. Dr. Chen was thoughtful and precise, with a quiet enthusiasm that reminded me of my academic days. He proposed a study examining creative problem-solving capacity among employees with different work patterns, using both established cognitive assessments and neuroimaging techniques. The hypothesis is straightforward, he explained. Regular cognitive rest, including protected weekends and boundaries around work hours, enhances neural connectivity patterns associated with creative insight and complex problem-solving. "And you think our organization would be a good testing ground for this?" I asked. "Ideal," he confirmed. "You've maintained these policies consistently over time, which reduces confounding variables, and you have comparative data from before implementation, which provides a valuable baseline." We agreed to proceed with the study, inviting employees to participate voluntarily. The response was overwhelming, with over 200 people signing up within days. Dr. Chen's team designed a protocol that would minimize disruption while gathering meaningful data. The research proceeded over 6 months, combining cognitive assessments, work pattern analysis, and targeted neuroimaging for a subset of participants. The results, when finally compiled, were striking even to those of us who had long believed in the value of boundaries. Employees who consistently protected their weekends and maintained clear separations between work and personal time showed significantly higher performance on creative problem-solving tasks. They demonstrated greater cognitive flexibility, more innovative approaches to challenges, and better integration of disparate information. The neuroimaging component revealed corresponding patterns in brain activity. Regular cognitive rest was associated with stronger connections between networks involved in creative thinking and with more efficient activation patterns during complex tasks. In essence, Dr. Chen explained during our review meeting, "Your work policies aren't just good for morale or work-life balance. They're optimizing your team's cognitive function in measurable, consistent ways." We published the findings in collaboration with Dr. Chen's team, contributing to a growing body of research on sustainable work practices. The paper received significant attention, both within academic circles and among business leaders seeking evidence-based approaches to productivity. This research reinforced what we'd discovered through experience. Boundaries weren't restrictions to be overcome, but foundations to be strengthened. By protecting time for cognitive rest and renewal, we enabled more effective engagement during work hours. The 11th anniversary of my termination from Stratos Nova passed quietly. It was no longer a date I marked with particular attention, just another milestone in a journey that had taken unexpected turns. That evening, I received a message from Toby, who had risen to become our Chief Technology Officer while maintaining his straightforward approach to both code and communication. "Just realized what day it is," he wrote. "Thought you might appreciate this." Attached was a screenshot of a news article announcing the final closure of what remained of Stratos Nova's intellectual property portfolio. The assets had been sold to a holding company specializing in obsolete technologies, marking the definitive end of the company that had once fired me. I smiled at the symmetry. 11 years ago, they had escorted me from the building, believing they were removing a problem. Instead, they had set in motion a transformation that extended far beyond one company or career. The following week brought an invitation I hadn't anticipated. The President's Council on Work and Well-Being wanted me to serve as a special advisor on their initiative to develop national guidelines for sustainable work practices. The role would involve quarterly meetings in Washington, contributing to policy recommendations that could influence labor regulations and corporate standards across the country. Your experience bridges the gap between theory and application. The invitation stated, "You've demonstrated that respecting boundaries isn't just humane, it's economically sound." I accepted, recognizing the opportunity to extend our impact beyond individual organizations to broader systems and structures. The principles we'd developed through practical experience could help shape policies affecting millions of workers. My first meeting with the council was scheduled for a Wednesday in early spring. As I prepared for the trip to Washington, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 12 years ago, I'd been a graduate student with a smoking microwave and a half-finished thesis, trying to solve a problem no one else seemed interested in. That work had led to clarity gauge, to acquisition and betrayal, to reclamation and renewal, and finally to transformation that rippled far beyond my original vision. Throughout that journey, one principle had remained constant: the insistence that weekends belonged to life, not work. That simple boundary, seemingly restrictive, had created space for creativity and growth that might otherwise have been impossible. As my flight descended toward Washington, I thought about the microwave incident that had started everything. In that moment of crisis, with plastic smoke filling my apartment, I had seen a pattern that others had missed: a connection between what people say and what they truly feel. That insight had become Clarity Gage's technological foundation. But the deeper lesson had emerged later. Understanding human emotion isn't just about algorithms and data points. It's about recognizing what people need to thrive, including time for rest, renewal, and life beyond work. They fired me because I refused to work weekends. In doing so, they inadvertently launched a journey that would transform not just my career, but an entire approach to work itself. The $1 clause had been my escape hatch, allowing me to reclaim what was rightfully mine. But the real value wasn't in what it let me take back. It was in what it allowed me to rebuild, not just a more successful company, but a more humane way of working. A model that respected boundaries not as limitations, but as foundations for sustainable success. As the plane touched down, I smiled at the thought. Tomorrow would be a day of important discussions about the future of work in our country, but the weekend would still be sacred time for rest and renewal. And on Monday, we'd return to our respective responsibilities, ready to continue building something meaningful together. Some boundaries are worth defending, even when they cost you everything, especially when they give you everything back and more than you ever imagined.